It's a little after 4 o'clock, so let's start the meeting. Could we please start with the roll call?
No, we're not going to put.
I'll note for the record that Councilmember Hawkins Manuelian is not here presently. Councilmember Polito. Here. Councilmember Lewis.
Here.
Vice Mayor Whitmer. Here. Mayor DeGolia.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Okay, the first item on the agenda is public comments, which is at a special meeting designed for items that are on the agenda. However, if anyone wishes to make a comment when we come to that item on the agenda, you can comment at that time. But if someone would like to comment now on an item on the agenda, which usually people only do if they're not going to stick around, you're welcome to make the public comment. I don't see any public comments online. Do you, Anthony? Okay, so I don't see any public comments at this time. Let's go on. The next item is consideration and appointment to the town for the Park and Rec Committee.
So I'll be taking this, Mayor and Council. As you know, we have 2 open seats on the Park and Recreation Committee. One of those open seats is for a term that expires June 2026, which was a part of the annual recruitment to replace a person who didn't choose to reapply, and the other was due to a midterm vacancy, and that term expires on June 2024. So we conducted sort of an ongoing recruitment for these open vacant seats, and we recently received 2 different applicants, Noah Eisner, who's online, and Patricia Kubal, who I believe is here in person. Both are, available to speak to their application. If you guys would like them to do that, as you know, my suggestion is that as you make the recommendation for appointment, we do it based on the term that we're looking to appoint them for, and one of the candidates may have an interest in a longer or a shorter term, which we can always ask them for their input on that. And I have nothing further.
Well, just to be clear, right now we have an opening that is open until 2026. Is that
Right, we
correct?
have two separate openings.
Well, but isn't one?
One won't expire until June 2026, and the other one expires in June 2024. We had a person.
Are those
resign
both
on the-
open seats, not foundation seats?
Correct. Yeah, they're open regular seats.
Oh, they're open seats.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, great. So we have 2
2 applicants.
open seats and
open
2
seats.
applicants.
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay.
Here comes Diana. No, that's
No,
not
that's not
Diana.
Diana.
That's not Diana.
Well,
Sorry.
I would like to offer the applicants an opportunity to speak to the council.
Mhm.
And then if council members have questions, why don't we let them speak first? And then if any of you have questions, we can ask questions.
Sure. Sounds good. You wanna let
Okay,
the online guy-
why don't we let
No.
Noah, who is online, go first?
Noah?
You're muted, Noah.
Yep, yep. I think, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to apply for the Parks and Rec Committee membership. Sorry, my dog jumped in here. I've been a member or lived in Atherton the last 3 years. I've been trying to get more and more active in the community. And one of the things that I've been working specifically with the Parks and Rec Commission on is trying to introduce the game of pickleball to at Holbrook Palmer Park. So I got to meet a number of members of the Parks and Rec Committee, as well as some others in the community, trying to get that program started. And I think by joining the commission, I'll have more influence over that and other programs as we go forward. So appreciate the consideration.
Okay. And Patricia, yes, please.
Thank you very much for the time to speak. I've been in Atherton 35 years. I raised my 4 children. My husband and I raised our 4 children here. We have 3 grandsons who are also spending a great deal of time in Atherton, although 2 of them live in Portola Valley and 1 lives in Mill Valley. But we have been here a very, very long time. I grew up in Hillsborough, so I started coming to Atherton in 1957.
Wow,
So I've been coming here for 65 years.
gosh.
And I absolutely love the town.
Yeah.
It is extremely special to me.
Mhm.
Holbrook Palmer is extremely special to me. It's where my identical twin daughters and my younger daughter took ballet. I've been to many weddings there. I think it's the jewel of Atherton, and I think preserving it, and perhaps I don't feel the same way about pickleball, that it should go on tennis courts, but we can figure that out. But looking at the future for Atherton, I think we need to address pickleball more broadly, because there's courts all over the place. And the research I've done on them is that there's a lot of civic unrest about it. And I'd like us to be ahead of the curve and not wait for people to get upset, because that typically doesn't yield a very good result. So it would be my honor and privilege to serve on Parks and Rec. Thank you.
Great. Questions? I have a question. Do you have a preference as to whether you, so we have two terms, which are partial terms. One is a 3-year, is that, no, one's a full term,
Full
4-year
4 years,
term, and
yeah.
one's a 1-year term.
Yeah, technically one.
2 year,
Okay,
26.
Yes,
How
Noah,
about
the same
Noah?
thing.
Yeah,
yeah.
no,
Noah, can you answer that same question?
1 second, let me get him a chance to.
You're muted.
We couldn't hear you, sir, so now you should be able to, yeah.
Yeah, back to unmuting. I'm open to either. I'm happy to do the shorter term to, get involved and see how it goes. I'm happy to do the longer one. So that's how I would say.
Okay, great. Any other questions from anyone on the council?
I have a comment.
Sure.
So I just want to thank both of you for applying for this, these volunteer positions. As you know, it is a volunteer position and you don't get remunerated in any way, shape or form. And it's a lot of work. And if you listen to our last council meeting when Alex Kay gave his update for the Park and Rec end of the year report, it takes a lot of work, and Park and Rec is one of our more important, I mean, all of our committees and commissions are very, very important, but Holbrook Palmer Park is our only park that we have in our town. And it's, you have a great, at this time, council liaison with the mayor as part of it. And he's been on that as a liaison from council for a long time. So you do have council input on that. There's things that we agree upon, things we don't disagree upon or don't totally agree upon. And a good debate is healthy. And that's, I think, something that have differing points of view. So I feel fine accepting both of these applications from our residents.
I want to back that up. I have been the liaison on the Park and Rec Committee for the last 9 years. I do believe that the park is absolutely the crown jewel of this town, notwithstanding that we've just built this new great town center. But it's a 22-acre parcel that is really a unique parcel when you look at municipal parks. It's not an arboretum and it's not a municipal park. It kind of fits in between the two. It's used for athletic purposes as well as enjoyment. And probably the biggest use is just people walking around the path around the park and enjoying how pastoral it is. So it's a truly unique park, and we hold it dear to our hearts from the council. And I think we've done a lot of work on it, and we are continuing to do work on it, the next year being the biggest project we will have done in the park. So I also really appreciate the applications for the committee, and I agree with Elizabeth. In fact, I'll make a motion to appoint Patricia Kubal to the 4-year term and Noah Eisner to the 1-year term.
I'd like to second that.
It's,
All in favor?
aye.
Aye. Okay.
What- Is it really just a 1-year term? It's through 2024.
Oh, maybe it's a 2-year
Yeah,
term. Sorry.
2-year term. All right.
Yeah, 2024. You're right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So thank you. Thank you both for applying and showing your interest in this opportunity. There are also other committees that you may want to join from time to time. So please keep that in mind too.
Or tell your friends,
Yeah.
Since we're neighbors, tell your friends.
Okay, so we're moving on to item number 4, which is to discuss the housing element update and to authorize staff to transmit a filing to HCD.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Did we vote on that?
On the park and rec?
uh-huh.
Yes.
Did we?
We had a motion and we
Okay,
voted
sorry.
unanimously.
I spaced out. Sorry. Okay.
No problem. We don't have to do roll call anymore.
I'm used to that
That's one of the benefits of meeting
being
in
here.
person.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Staff received feedback from the council from the July 20th council meeting and incorporated that information into a draft, a new draft that's attached as a link to the staff report. With the release of the agenda packet last week, individual council members provided me with some additional feedback, which we'll go through today. The agenda packet on the town's website includes a link to those comments, and I believe Robert Barone is going to check on some printable copies that we'll have at the back of the room in a few minutes. Francesca's working on that. So unless specifically called out this afternoon, I don't plan to go through all the various grammar and language changes that are in there that are a part of that comment sheet. But there are some particularly larger policy objectives and goals that were proposed that I want to go through in detail, as well as a couple of other narrative comments that'll follow that discussion. As you know, I worked the public planning counter years and years, and seems like years ago, as an earlier rendition of my career. But my experience is dwarfed by more than 30 years of experience of your town planner, Lisa Costa Sanders, on Zoom there on the top right, and the legal expertise of Mona Ibrahimi, our city attorney, who has some specific expertise in the land use legal arena. So if there's some specific detailed questions that I can't answer, they certainly can. So with that, I'm going to jump right into the first goal objective that was proposed for change. And we should discuss and probably close out each one of them as we go through before moving on to the next. There are 5 big ones to discuss before turning to some of the other narrative comments and issues. The first one is include a goal to increase the height limits for garages to allow for the creation of ADUs above garages. There's a couple of policy issues to discuss around that. Detached garages are allowed to be 10 feet from a property line. This proposed policy objective would allow for a second story on those detached structures for the creation of an ADU. And their current height limit is 16 feet. This could increase it considerably. So with that, I'll turn it to the council to discuss whether or not you want to include that particular policy objective.
Okay,
I got a comment, not
Yeah.
a question.
I
okay,
have a question, actually.
okay. Why don't we take the questions first?
Question was, if it's at 16 right now, if it's at 16 right now, to make it 2 stories, what would be the minimum it could be? Because I have to assume that the house height, which was in our notes, is whether to make it house height, that's got to be a lot bigger than the minimum of 2 stories. So what would be the minimum?
You have a comment on that, Lisa?
I may need to check with the building official and get back. I know, I believe it's 7.5 feet is kind of the interior height for occupiable space. You want a proper foundation. You usually have at least a foot in between the stories and then the roof heights. But 16 feet isn't quite adequate. Other communities, I believe, is closer to 25 feet for a 2-story. But I think if you give us the concept that you are agreeable to this, then that's a zoning code change that would be made. And we can find out what the specifics would be. And I guess you're looking at kind of what's that minimum. I just want to let you know, in other communities, that's kind of the biggest complaint that they receive is 2-story ADUs, 4 feet off property line in their situations. So we can kind of come back as to what that height limit would be, and that's not something you would typically put in your general plan. But I would need the direction. Do you want to go the same as the main building or something lower?
So other questions?
If it's, as I understand it, if it's attached, it can be the same height as the main house, correct?
That's correct, but then it would need to meet the main house setback requirements, which are much larger than the 10 feet.
Well, that was my next question. If it's detached and we're going to modify the height, I would think we'd want to modify the 10-foot setback. That's my opinion. I presume we can do that.
Well, I think the goal would be to, I think what I heard from the council member is that you've got existing garages and giving people the opportunity to build over those. And many of them are, located at that 10-foot setback requirement.
I understand, but I'm not sure that we want to allow second stories on garages that only meet the 10-foot setback.
Well,
Yeah, and I think I defer to the city attorney also, because if ADUs are allowed to be 4 feet off property line, it gets a little confusing when it's above another building. How do we apply those setbacks? It gets a little complicated.
Right. There's no clear explanation in the ADU laws, but presumably the physical setback of the primary building for which an ADU rests on would still have to meet those minimum ADU setback requirements, which is 4 feet unless there's compliance with the town setbacks and they can build bigger.
I'm just saying that if you look at a garage on a 10-foot setback to suddenly bump it up to 25 feet has a serious impact on the neighbor. And before we go down that, I mean, I'm not sure we should go down that path, but I wouldn't want to include that language in this submission until we've given it more thought.
Okay, I have a question also. So if there is a room built over an attached garage, I assume that building unit has a setback that's the same as the main house setback. Is that correct? If it's attached, not detached.
Correct.
And what is that setback?
Well, it depends.
Well, it's going to depend on the width of the lot. So if you have a proper acre, it would be 50-foot side yard, 60-foot front and rear. If it's smaller than that, then there's a ratio based on
I
the
see.
lot width.
Okay, and I think Bob asked this question, but I'll re-ask it. If we were to allow a existing detached garage to have an ADU built on top of it, I assume we could require that to have a setback that's greater than 10 feet, understanding if we were to do that, that would then not apply to a large number of garages that are only 10 feet right now. I assume we can do anything that we choose to do in terms of the setbacks.
Yeah, you're talking about crafting a code so that if someone wanted to build a new detached garage with an ADU over the top of it, you could require a larger setback.
Or if they happen to have a garage now that would comply with the setback, then they could build an ADU over that garage. But let's say we chose a 30-foot setback for a ADU over a detached garage. There may be people that have detached garages that have 30-foot setbacks.
Right.
Understanding that many would only have a 10-foot setback since that was authorized by the code.
So following up your logic or your train of thought about an existing garage that is only 10 feet setback from the property line, neighbor property line. If the ADU is going to be built above, say, an existing garage that is 10-foot setback, if the lid is, and most of them are pitched roofs, right? So if you expand that pitched attic roof area, how much more height do you really need in order to create a living unit above a garage environment? You put a flat lid over the garage environment for a car, maybe not a giant SUV or a camper truck, but a reasonable height limit for any vehicle. And then you can go up. How high would you need for a comfortable height limit for a living environment? That's kind of what you were
That's
asking.
what I was
That's what you were
getting at.
trying to
And the
get.
reason why I
Yeah.
ask is because I did explore that for my
Mhm.
own property.
Yeah,
And I was told if we did the dormer approach you were describing, we only needed 2 more feet.
yeah.
So
I
the
mean,
current level is 16. We needed only to go to 18 to
18.
be able to allow all those to happen.
right.
So in
So-
my mind, 2 feet higher is a lot better than a whole huge ADU that's
Right.
4 feet away from your fence.
Right. It's.
You could
it's much-
build a living unit above a garage with an 18-foot height.
In order for us to just put a second story on our garage.
It has
we-
to be flat.
It was a
flat
flat
roof and
roof
it's still
and
a
we were
stretch.
popping out with dormers across the side to bring it to it's like the roof is like this, which a lot of them are. And then we were just going to pop straight out, but we were 2 feet shy. So we would have had to dig down 2 feet. We obviously didn't do it, but
No.
that's what we were told in order to do an ADU with the
But
limits
I
that we
think
currently
2
have.
feet is, really negligible, I think.
That
you
was
know,
my thought
so-
process, and it opens us up to a whole bunch of new ADUs that are on existing buildings as opposed to brand new sprawl that's 4 feet from your
Because the
fence.
height limit is measured at the pitch, at the apex of the
Well,
pitch, right?
Well, I guess I don't think the council really needs to design them today.
Well, I
so
think
to
we have
speak.
to understand,
Yeah, but you gotta
the
understand the
massing of
impacts.
it,
Yeah, and
okay,
that's what
before we
staff's
make a
looking for.
decision.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think the questions have gone pretty far, so let's take a comment. Go ahead, Bill.
All right, so of course, we've already highlighted the setback from the neighbors. As has been pointed out, most of the garages are set back in the back part of their property, generally on the side, generally within 10 feet. And if you're going to put something on top of it that's going to violate our viewing back into the neighbors without any screening. And you might be able to put 2 additional feet on there at your place. But talking to the fire district, who don't recommend doing this because there's flammable material, whether you have an electric car or you have a gasoline powered car below, that it would be required that you would also need to be able to put in sprinkler systems both at the top and the bottom rooms. And so, for me, we have all of the screening requirements is based on if a house is greater than what we say it's going to be, we have to have taller screening. There has to be, if a house wants to be higher than what we have today, we have to set it back even further. And so now we're going to go ahead and increase the size next to when it's right within 10 feet, because the councilwoman wants to go ahead and build it at her property. I don't think that that's appropriate. Well, that's how you brought it up.
No, that's-
So I really don't think that, honestly, I'm not in favor of this. I think that the neighbors would be quite upset. And I don't think it's a good idea. I really don't. I'm 100% against it. I will not vote for this.
Okay,
That's okay.
other comments?
Well, I can comment.
Sure, go
I'm
ahead.
not planning to build that ADU. In fact, I'm going to probably be obnoxious and build one 4 feet from the fence if I do one. But anyway, we're in a position where we need to have ADUs, and we're going out on a strategy that's saying that we're not going to do overlays. We're not going to do multi-dwellings. We're going to meet this requirement by the state all through ADUs, which means we need to advocate people to build ADUs. Right now, we have ADU laws that allow people to build new buildings 4 feet from their neighbor's yard. And that's covering more grass. It's covering more, it's new complexes. People are building compounds. I think the idea of allowing us to do garages over existing buildings, and I'm not talking about 25, 26 feet, just minimum of what it could be. And you see these, there are garages that are out, there are templates online. I think that's less offensive. You're not covering more grass, so you're keeping it to existing buildings already. And to me, that would be the perfect kind. It's already in a driveway. It's already got access to private entrance access. It just, in many ways, it makes building an ADU a lot easier for a lot of people. So I'm in favor of it.
I just,
Go ahead.
So I'm going to paint a little bit of a different picture than Council Vice Mayor Widmer did with his vision of what a living environment above an existing garage might be. Instead of building on that half of the garage, many people have 2 or 3 car garages, right, in their backyard. And there is a large portion of it, maybe 2/3 of it, that would be on the interfacing part of the property and not the property line. And if that would increase the potential setback width from the fence line of your property line neighbor from 10 to maybe 15 or 18 feet, maybe even 20 feet, and then you build above that in the other parts. I think it's really, really a good idea. Many, many other cities all around are getting around it. And I don't know why you brought up the fire district about this and that. And that's a problem that can all be solved within the construction materials, because if you have an interior attached garage in your house, that's living quarters with, potential flammables of your cars catching fire. So that's, I think, a issue here.
But if I could ask you a question.
Of course you
You're
can.
proposing to just expand or even you maybe use that third bay and expand out. That's what you're describing.
Up.
Mm,
up.
okay.
So only build over part of the garage is what you're saying.
I'm saying that's a possibility. I mean,
But if you build it
you're
over the part of
concerned
the
about,
garage
that
that
the height
is
is limited, it's
internally,
fine.
further internal.
no, I didn't say
That's-
that.
okay.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay. but I
Your
was
mind
just- I
kind of
was-
really goes in, kind of crazy scenarios here. a little bit.
Elizabeth,
But anyway.
come on, come on.
So anyway, I just think that, I
Make it
think
productive.
it's worth discussing and putting some boundaries and on it. And it's not going to create, I mean, if they did it at my house right now, the neighbor wouldn't even see it because my landscaping on both sides is such, it would never see any height, additional height. So
Okay.
I just think it's really something that we should include in this. I think we need to include as much as we can in the plan because we're going to be short.
You make one more comment?
Well, let me make a comment. I think that the place to start is that we're looking at qualifying for the state requirements principally with ADUs and secondarily with development on school property. And that's the vast bulk of how we're going to achieve the requirements the state has set for us. I think to be able to do that on ADUs, there are a number of things that we have to do, all of which lead us to establishing and enforcing and working with residents to make work a comprehensive program around both ADU development and ADU rental. And we're going to discuss that in different stages tonight. This is the first stage. I think that the place to start with this is the lowest hanging fruit, which is that there probably are detached garages that have sufficient setback from the side or rear fence that to add a ADU on top of them, which hadn't previously been allowed by the code, would be okay to do and wouldn't disturb the neighbors. And I think we need to approach this particular issue with a lot of sensitivity to making sure that we're going to be respectful of the neighbors, because I agree that to put a 25 high foot wall or even peak of a building 10 feet from a yard is not acceptable. I wouldn't support that. And I know that we have an ADU law that allows people to build detached ADUs that are 4 feet from the fence. And if they do that, they're limited to an 800-foot ADU. If they want to build an ADU to the allowed 1,200 feet, which the Atherton Code allows, they have to use the full 10-foot setback from a side or rear fence. And I think that's a good way. I think we managed that in a very good way to respectfully protect neighbors from encroachment on this. So I think the easiest thing is those setbacks, and we need to figure out, well, how far should that be? Maybe 50 feet is more than is necessary, but maybe 30 feet would be acceptable. And I'd like to know what the planners would recommend or what the building department would recommend that would make sense. My gut tells me that 30 feet would be workable. That wouldn't be upsetting to me as a neighbor, but I'm not an expert on the subject. If I then move from the lowest hanging fruit, which are those detached garages that are at least 30 feet from a fence line, I can imagine that there are garages, many garages that have been built that are only 10 feet from the fence line, but that are 3-car garages and probably have a peaked roof. And if the development were not to adjust that peaked roof, but were to expand a ADU unit in the second story on the side that doesn't face the fence, then that wouldn't be bothersome to me. And I'm not exactly sure how to codify that, but I think that approach is that's a reasonable approach and respects the neighbors, and because we don't want to encroach on the neighbors.
I agree with those comments.
Lots of things seem reasonable first pass, like the overlay that seemed reasonable at that moment. This is, I mean, Diana, what you're talking about is what I said before, that this SB 9 lot split and ADU development, it's going to turn into the wild, wild west. Be careful what you wish for. So while I don't go down to the extreme that Bill vocalized, I can sit in my own property and look in two directions and think that I don't think I'd like a 25, 30-foot garage. And I don't think too many of these garages, first of all, I don't think a lot of them you could build up without redoing the whole garage because the footings aren't adequate. But I don't think there are too many that could be done with an 18-foot height limit. So I think this needs more thought. I think you could put in the housing. In fact, if it requires a motion, I'll make one. We should put in the housing element that we're going to do thorough vetting of the possibility of expanding our allowances to over garage units. But
Without specifics.
yeah, definitely
Good
without
idea.
specifics.
That's all that we're basically
Right.
looking for. It's just that we would
Correct.
consider that. And it would still have to go through that land use review process with the Public Planning Commission and back to the council.
I mean, because, we're in a unique situation because some of our properties are very large with lots of setbacks already in place. Some are smaller with not so big setbacks in place. And so, not everybody is created equal and not everybody we just can't create like a one size fits all. It's got to be, on a kind of a review and a case by
So does
case.
this require a motion item by item?
I would appreciate a motion item by item, but before you actually get to a motion, we'd have to take some public
Public
comment
comment.
on each particular one. And in the interest of time, we do have a hard stop at 6 o'clock because the Planning Commission starts at 6. So
Okay.
making that
They can sit on our
So
laps.
good. So let me see if there's any public comment on this specific subject, the idea of making some adjustment to the municipal code to allow ADUs over garages. Pardon?
Not online.
No online. Okay, I don't see any public comment in the room either.
Okay.
Um,
Bob,
Then I'd like to make the motion that I just said.
I'll second that.
Okay,
Anthony.
any discussion?
No, I think that each of them are different, and I don't have a problem putting something in that we're going to study things more thoroughly, because I think this does require a lot more consideration, especially when you're considering changing, screening, and things like that. So I thought Bob's comments were very good, as well as yours are, Mr. Mayor. If they're setback, I've got no issue. If we change the setback to 30 feet, that's very reasonable. So, but just being able to do it on a 10-foot one, I don't like, but putting it in the report that says that we would be willing to continue to study it. If that opens up a more realistic ADU potential, I'm all for that. We want to get the thing approved.
Well, I think we'd want to say that I thought the intent of the motion was that we would study it with the intent of
Doing something.
expanding it to enable
Right.
more ADUs, but we have to figure out what the specifics will be.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, and
Great.
then you need a roll call on that motion, I believe.
Uh,
Or,
wait,
or a vote. on the
No,
motion.
all in favor?
I,
Aye.
All right, the second is to include a goal or objective to consider the waiver of fees for ADUs, either planning and building or one or the other or both. And so that some of the policy questions that staff had are, should the fee waiver be for all new ADUs or should it be for only those that agree to rent them as affordable for a specific period of time? And then there's also the issue of prevailing wages and how it relates to the waiver of fees as a public works project. And if there's questions on that, the city attorney can advise.
Can you explain the issue of the waiver of fees?
On the prevailing wage issue,
Yeah, the prevailing wage issue.
Mona?
Yes, I can speak to that, Mayor DeGolia. The issue of prevailing wages arises anytime there is a governmental subsidy or a public funds that contribute to an otherwise private project. So if the town were to waive fees that were otherwise due to it, that would be considered a public contribution to a private project. And the entirety of the project would then be potentially subject to the payment of prevailing wages for the construction of the ADU.
I still don't understand. I
So
can understand the gift of public funds
Sure.
situation, but then how do you would then imply or go ahead, the prevailing wage onto the project?
yes, so let me step back, actually. Private projects, a private property owner, contractor can directly contract with a person or with a company to construct on terms that the two parties agree with. With public agencies, including the town, we have to comply with the requirements in the public contract code. It's the statute that governs public projects. Now, there's a provision in the labor code section and the public contract code that said anytime public monies go towards private projects, it converts that private project to a quasi-public project. And the owner of that project then has to pay prevailing wages to anyone who is constructing that work. So if I'm a homeowner and I'm seeking a fee waiver to build an ADU from the town and I obtain that fee waiver, let's just say that it's $1,000. Even though I'm getting that $1,000 fee waiver and I don't have to pay that to the town, anyone who is going to be employed by me to build that ADU, I have to make sure that I am paying them what's called prevailing wages, which is sometimes more than what you would otherwise be able to obtain under a private contract.
So I have a question about that. So Monte Sereno has just proposed a program where 50% of the ADU development fee, and correct me if I'm wrong, George, but my understanding of it is where 50% of the ADU development fee would be waived for the first 225 residents that send in a letter stating a non-obligatory commitment to build an ADU, essentially.
Denver, yeah.
And does that say that every one of those ADUs where 50% of the fee might be waived would have to be built with union labor?
Don't know what their legal analysis is, but that is what ours is.
Say that again?
I do not know what their legal analysis is, but that is what ours is.
They obviously don't have the same attorney.
I do want to give one exception. There is this exception called the de minimis exception. And if the waiver is so de minimis in comparison to the entirety of the project, then you can potentially be exempt. The Department of DIR has been very reluctant to accept that, and that's a terrific risk that the private property owner is taking. It is possible, so I do want to make you all aware of that. But the general rule is that any public monies used for private projects converts that private project into one for which prevailing wages are paid.
So,
Mona,
Yes.
who is at risk in that situation? Is it the town? Or if the town advises that private property owner, given this waiver of fees, you have an obligation to pay prevailing wages, we're done, and it's the private property owner's responsibility?
It is the private property's responsibility, and we would certainly, if the council wishes to move forward with this, only do fee waivers with the language that expressly says that it's your determination to see whether prevailing wages applies or not. But it would be the private property owner's obligation.
okay, so I want to just follow through on this line of questioning a little further. We, as a council, decided to waive solar panel deployment fees, which I believe was $500 when we decided to waive it. And that would, you may say, be de minimis in the context of the entire solar panel project, which would be somewhere in the $10,000 to $50,000 range, probably. Am I correct in understanding that the current ADU planning fees are $1,032? So if we are saying that we would waive that for all or for some limited number of ADUs in order to encourage ADU development, in order to comply with the state housing requirements, would that be a 1,032 waiver? And if so, just reflecting on the cost difference between 1,032 and what it would cost to build an ADU versus the solar planning fees and what it would cost to put in the solar panels, I'd have to think that that's pretty de minimis.
It's probable that that's pretty de minimis. I think that the DIR department staff issued a determination in early 2021 where they were interpreting it to say that if it's less than 2% of the totality of the project cost, it might be exempt from prevailing wages. But again, that responsibility would be on the homeowner to make that determination.
Are we right that the fees are roughly $1,000?
Yes.
Yeah,
that
and so
no-
the planning review fee is, I believe, $1,067, and then the building permit fee is going to be based on the valuation. Just a quick question following up on the mayor's comment through the city attorney. For the example he gave of the solar, the actual adopted fee schedule has 0 for solar. So it's not really waiving a fee on an individual basis. They just established it at there's no fee. Would that be a different application then from the kind of town public contribution of funds to the project if they were to lower the fee on the fee schedule?
I think that if the council was to not establish a fee, then there would be no waiver or a gift of public funds or any kind of public contribution of funds to a private project. And so that would really reduce the question of a prevailing wage issue from arising. So with the solar example, it's an even better example of not triggering prevailing wages.
Okay, Bill.
So in your opinion, Mona, I really have 2 questions, but in your opinion, Mona, we could waive the application fee, which is slightly over $1,000. but not necessarily the building fee, which is attached to the value of the ADU that's being built. So that would not get into the prevailing wage, in your opinion. Is that correct? Because
Well, I think you can waive the ADU permit and the building permit. The question is, if you do that, or one or both, does that result in a prevailing wage implication for the property? And the answer is that in all likelihood, if the fee is less than 2% of the totality of the construction, probably not. It would be a case-by-case determination. And that's why I keep referring back to the private property owner making that determination. If they're constructing a pretty affordable ADU and the waiver of the $1,000 is more than 2%, they have to pay prevailing wages. The other option that you have is to just not establish a fee for pulling an ADU permit. And if you don't establish a fee, then there is no prevailing wage issue at all.
so could we,
Semantics, right?
could we have the fee? We're going to waive the fee as Rick had brought up for the first 250 or something like that. That's a conditional waiver. And so would that have the same implications?
Could I make another suggestion, perhaps? If there was a desire to encourage ADUs and encourage their affordability, maybe it's, you set two fees, a fee per Lisa's suggestion of 0 for a new ADU for those that are going to be rented at affordability rates, and then a different fee for those that are not, and maintain the building permit, because that's based on valuation.
Well, that was getting into my next question. Where did that come from? The agreement or commitment that it would be rented to at affordable rates?
That's just a suggestion.
Okay, I thought it was a good suggestion, but
Yeah.
is it, how are we going to track that and how are we going to verify that?
They'd be required to report.
Okay, let me take a public comment.
We couldn't hear you unless you spoke at the mic. Thank you.
Attorney, discussing this, I think it is essential that we have no waivers whatsoever. The way this is going, these waivers are going to be nothing but problems. And nobody wants to have 1,032 waived to build an ADU and put them in the situation of having to use union labor. So I would second, I believe it's Bill's, I would get rid of any ADU fees, have none available so you can't waive them. If you don't have it, you can't waive it. And then have the building department fees set up in a very favorable manner to encourage ADUs, but not waive them. Have them available. I would not have the first 80 people or the first 30 people, or the first 200 people. I think that doesn't make any sense. It's, nobody's going to want to have a fee waived. In fact, if you decide to do that, I think you have to put in a provision that people can decline to have their fee waived, because nobody building is going to want a fee waived that leads them to using union labor. So this is not a very complicated situation. And I think the town needs to look really carefully. If you're going to put down tens of thousands of dollars to build an ADU, you do not want the price to go up by 50 to 70% by using union labor. Thank you.
To take this to a lay perspective, it sounds like it's semantics. If we set the fees and we just say no fee, as opposed to saying there's a fee and we're waiving it, the second we call it waiving it, we get into a different kettle of fish. So if we set the fee, let's just set the fee.
Bob?
Well, I don't think waiving $1,000 fee, if that's all we're going to do, has anything to do with anything. It's not going to stimulate. I mean,
Good.
on the other hand, if there's no building fees for an ADU, now, I know the ADU fees in San Jose because I've done 3 or 4 of them, and by the time you have school taxes and everything else, it's $20,000.
So I think, so we're only talking right here about the planning fees. So it's the planning fees, which is the application, which is 1,032. We could eliminate that fee.
Right,
And
and
just not
nobody-
have a fee, just like we did with solar panels. Then we don't have an issue of waiver. We don't have an issue with prevailing wages, which are not, which we know isn't going to work for homeowners. The unions don't want the jobs. I know that from Peninsula Clean Energy, where we're trying to get unions to put in charging stations, and they won't even bid on the jobs. They don't want them. It's too small for them. So I think we could eliminate the planning fee, but I'd like to know what the building fees are, which probably staff needs to come back to us. And if I would suggest for this one, going to HCD with our first filing, we tell them that the council has an intent, once this is approved, to eliminate the planning fees for ADUs, and we'll look at making further changes to any other ADU fees. And staff needs to come back to us and tell us what the full set of ADU fees would be. I don't know what we're talking about.
They will vary based on the size of the
But
ADU
I
and.
think
Wait,
it's just
but
regular
we can
building
get that.
fees.
No, but I don't even know, but
I know,
you
but-
are in the building world, I'm not.
I know, but it's
So
in
I
our
don't have
building
any
code
idea.
already. I mean, it's all the formulas. It's.
But I'd like to
whatever
know
it
what
is.
that is, because we may want to make an adjustment in those for people that are going to, for example, rent their ADUs or rent their ADUs, we
Wow.
could say, or rent them affordably. We can discuss that.
Everybody's
Yeah,
gonna
down the
say they're
line,
gonna
right.
rent them and then they don't.
Well, okay, but
I
that's
think we should
okay.
just eliminate the application fee, say that we're gonna do that, and we can look at other things, because some ADUs, like one of my neighbors built an ADU, and I understand it was $500,000 ADU. And so,
Well,
I'm sure
that's
that
easy.
happens.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so that's, since our,
Yeah.
our planning and inspection fees are all associated with the overall building project.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be serious money that we're actually not getting, because we have to pay Adam to go out and inspect it
No.
and all these other things.
So I think the suggestion of waiving the
Application fee.
application
Yes.
fee, eliminating it,
Yeah.
and having staff come back to us and just give us the information about what the ranges of the other fees are would be
Yeah.
helpful.
Right.
There was
I
a
agree.
motion.
That's
So
a nice,
a motion to eliminate the $1,000.
right,
fee.
second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. The third is also in relation to ADUs. Include a goal or objective to consider a policy to allow both a guest house / ADU and an ADU as rentals. And this, some of the policy questions here are: how many ADUs should be allowed to be created and or rented on a property at any one time? If a property owner has an ADU and then converts a pool house, can they rent them both? You could end up in a scenario where you have a main residence, a JADU, a guest house, which has been converted to an ADU, and an already existing ADU, and you have 4 renters on one property and no owner.
And no owner. Because the owner's
Yeah,
someplace
Because
else.
the owner's not
Collecting.
obligated to live there unless it's an SB9 split.
Right.
He's on the Riviera with all that rent money.
So that's the policy
Where she
question.
is. Okay. Questions?
I have a question about we've been talking about pool houses. If you have a pool house, it's not considered rentable unless it has a kitchen and a bathroom. If you add a kitchen and bathroom, does it automatically become an ADU? Is there any difference between what is considered a pool house and what is an ADU?
Lisa, you want to go through that one?
It's pretty tricky. It's easier on the new build side. It's a little harder on the conversion side. If that's the only structure on the property and it meets all the objective criteria of an ADU, then it would be considered an ADU. If they already had an ADU and they were trying to convert a cabana or a guest house into an ADU, we would have to say, no, you can't, because our code currently only allows one ADU on a property.
So I have a question. Is it true that our current code would allow someone to originally build an ADU and a cabana or a pool house, assuming that cabana or pool house doesn't qualify? I mean, i.e. doesn't have either a kitchen and or a bedroom. And
No, so
Yeah,
I'll let you
go
finish,
ahead.
sorry. You can build an ADU, and let's say you met all the objective criteria and it's 1,200 square feet exempt from the floor area. You can then build a guest house that has a kitchen, a bathroom, a bedroom, but that floor area has to count towards the maximum floor area for the property. And you're only limited to residing in it 30 days of the year. So you could have on the property today a new guest house and a new ADU.
But the pool house, or the guest house is 30 days or less.
That's correct by code.
And we go out and inspect every 30 days,
So,
just saying.
so one
Complaint
issue that we
basis.
have before us now is whether we want to authorize residents to rent by removing the 30-day maximum or less than 30-day rental. The guest house would be allowed for less than 30 days right now, I believe, but not allowed for more than 30 days by the code. Whether we want to remove that restriction, which would effectively allow people to rent, like you just said, up to 4 units, right? A JADU, an ADU, a guest house or pool house, and a main house.
Can you separate those? Because there's two different issues. One question is how many can you have on one property? The second is, as you said, with a pool house, right now you can only rent it for 30 days. So isn't that a separate question?
That
Live
that
in
one
it,
is already
not
in
rent.
the objectives, is to allow
So we are going to allow that one. So
that
that
one's
one's off
already
the table.
proposed in there. What we're asking about is, can you now have 2?
Yeah, so what we included in there is eliminate that 30-day restriction so that your guest house could be considered an ADU, but add a provision, a qualifier that says you can only rent one of those units at a time. So if you happen to have a property with an ADU and a guest house, you can only rent one of them at a time. That's how it's currently drafted in the housing element.
So the question now is,
Great.
do you want to remove that provision?
And as a practical matter, the way that works is the square footage of that pool house or guest house counts against the maximum square footage, whereas the JADU and the ADU square footage don't count.
That's correct.
Well, personally, I think we should allow that second unit to be rented. I think that, and if we're going to do that, we need to emphasize that with HCD, because I think that's
It's huge.
a big move. It opens up a bunch of property that does. So will they count? Will those units count in the HCD? There are 2 issues, obviously, before HCD. One is making affordable housing available, which you can do if it already is built. And the second is permitting the rental of property that wasn't previously allowed because it was a guest house or pool house.
Time limitation.
That one's an it depends answer. And I think Lisa's probably going to say something along the lines of, if that guest house or pool house already has all the features of a qualifying housing unit, it's already been counted. But if it doesn't, and you are converting it by adding a kitchen, adding a bathroom, then it will be added to the numbers. Is that correct, Lisa?
That's correct.
That's what she
Well,
says.
so let me just clarify then. So what you're saying is, if someone built a pool house or guest house with living quarters, bathroom and kitchen, counting against their square footage maximum, and they built a JADU and an ADU, that would have counted as 4 units already?
No, an existing guest house. Let's say you have an existing guest house in your backyard, ADU aside, an existing guest house in your backyard. It doesn't have a kitchen or it doesn't have a bathroom. It doesn't count as a unit. But
Right,
if you convert it, it adds to our numbers for HCD.
right.
But if it already has a kitchen, already has bathroom, already has sleeping quarters, it's already counted as a unit.
I don't,
Because we report it to HCD.
but it's not a living unit because you're limited by code to 30 days residency. So when you take away that restriction, then it becomes a living unit.
Lisa?
So wait, the question is, would it have counted as 4 living units in the last housing element?
That's your question.
Yeah,
That's,
but that's separate from what our
Separate,
question is.
slightly separate from my question.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I think it's.
Yeah, so the town did not previously report the construction of guest houses as living units because of that restriction. More recently, when the ADU laws changed and it kind of wiped out that distinction, if there was only a guest house built on the property, we did report that as a living unit because technically it could have counted as an ADU. So we were trying to, but previously, before the ADU laws changed, we did not count those units. However, HCD has indicated that they would not count units that are acting like a living unit today as a net new living unit unless it's not containing all those features that would qualify as a legal unit. So it could be that that guest house is already occupied by somebody and is already rented. And so they would not count that as a net new unit if we just removed that limitation. We can certainly ask again, but that was an interpretation we've received previously.
Yeah, can't win for
I-
losing.
So,
I think put differently, HCD is looking for some new action that's converting a guest house into a new habitable unit that it can count. So what it's telling us and what it's telling all of the jurisdictions in California is that if it really is an ADU, but you're not calling it one, and it's already in existence, it should have been and could have been counted in your previous housing element RENA allocations. We're not going to count it for you in this one. But if you add new features that were not previously added to convert it from something that can now be used as permanent housing, then we can incorporate it into your RENA numbers.
Right, but the critical issue is if there's a law that says it can't be rented, then I don't know how you would have counted it as a living unit, even if it had the complying features. If the law said it couldn't be rented. Now, that would be HCD saying, well, there may have been a law, but it could have been rented illegally, so therefore we should count it.
or we counted it in the past. It should have
But
been
that's
counted
sort
in
of
the past.
surprising to
We're
me.
not going to count it going
Yeah,
forward.
so.
That doesn't make sense.
The other, with HCD, first off, the goal of the housing is to create housing or places to stay for people so that they're not on the street, so they can afford to be there. Then there are all these other rules that they put in, such as, well, if it's a dorm, but it's on a campus where there's a cafeteria, where they're getting food, they're sleeping, by the way, there's showers there. Oh, we can't count that. That's a bunch of baloney to me, as far as I'm concerned. But the rules are the rules, but we've done a lot here. And I think that, we should explore what we can count to the maximum extent possible. If somebody has a pool house, in many cases, people are living in not only pool houses, but they're living, there's that home share program. And, people are living and being placed by the county into homes. I know there's only one here in Atherton, but it's all over the county where you have an extra room and you can say, I'd be willing to take a resident. Some people go through that. Other people, I know some people in town that have a resident that's living in a spare bedroom, but it's going to cost a substantial amount of money to convert it to a JADU. So they just say, hey, just live in the bedroom and, you can use my kitchen and stuff like that. That stuff doesn't count. But, for some reason, we've taken a person off the street and we should be able to count that. And, it's just frustrating that they try, all they're trying to do is put us in a box so that we can create high density, tall apartment buildings here in Atherton because we're being targeted, I think. And of course, everybody else is too, but I really do think that it's wrong. We're not all San Francisco. We're not all San Francisco. And it's inappropriate because we are doing a lot for housing and getting people off the streets. And I just do not understand, you know, why we're being constrained and it's got to fit into a little box. It's a bunch of BS.
Okay. My opinion is, I think that if we want to be serious about adding all ADUs and rental units in town without doing townhome overlays on existing vacant property in a respectful and careful manner, we need to do this. And I would vote yes, that if you convert your existing pool house with, add a little kitchen or whatever you need to do to make it a rental unit, as well as an ADU and a JADU on your big house. It's like having, the gangs, all your relatives over. I mean, what's the difference? And so I'll make a motion to do that.
And they should have to register with the town.
Well,
as
yes, well,
such.
that's a whole nother issue that I hope we can talk about, because we have got to somehow codify all these new rental units, and our residents have to kind of sign up so that we can count them and count them accurately.
Yeah, that's
Right.
certainly part of the program.
So is the essence of your
Yes,
motion that you can rent more than one
Yes.
property on your property?
yes.
Oh.
ADU.
So is it that you can rent two?
You can get it, you can rent an ADU and you can convert your pool house into an legal ADU, and you can have your JADU attached.
Right, but so
rental
I
for-
think that's the limit, is that
That's the
there's
limit.
one other public comment.
Oh, I just want to clarify something.
The second bullet point says how many ADUs can be built per lot. And since ADUs don't count against the 18% FAR, I think that they should only be limited to one ADU per lot that doesn't count against the FAR, because.
Yeah.
I think
that-
that's what
that-
we're
That's not
doing.
being changed.
That's,
Well,
yeah.
but there's a bullet point here.
Which bullet point?
Oh, would this apply to all
It
lots?
says
in
how many
town?
ADUs can be built per lot?
What page are you on,
No,
Jeff?
it's page 6. It's this one right here. It's on this bullet. Uh,
It should-
Yeah,
one.
if
Oh,
I
okay.
understand the motion is to allow the conversion of a pool house or guest house to be rented. It has no adjustment to the FAR
No,
rules that
right.
currently exist.
Exactly,
Correct.
exactly.
Mhm.
And Lisa, you
Lisa,
were
did you have
going to
anything
add
to clarify?
something?
You
It
said-
was in the same lines as the public commenter. We're not calling the guest house an ADU. We're saying the guest house may be rented so that guest house square footage still counts. Thank you.
And it would be, if somebody had, I can imagine that there's some people have a series of buildings, some of which are permitted and some of which aren't. The purpose of this is to allow one rental unit, being a garage or a pool, a guest house or a pool house, to be rented in addition to a main house, a JDU and an ADU. It's not allowing 3 sheds to be converted in, 3 additional rentals to.
Right.
Only
be
things that have
created.
been permitted.
Right.
We're only changing things that have already been permitted. If
Right,
There have been
Right, like a
illegally built.
permitted
Well,
pool
but it
house.
also allows someone to upgrade
Mhm.
a pool house to add, for example, a
Right.
kitchen or a bathroom to.
Right.
So there would be one additional rental.
We are mixing two topics here, the topic at the bottom of page 5 and the topic at the,
Yeah, the next one I'll get to in
Yeah.
a second. Yeah.
so that,
So the one you're voting on now is JADU guest house allowed to be rented, as well as that ADU, which wouldn't count for the floor area.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I believe there's a
So
motion.
all
and a
in
second.
favor?
but I'm not.
I'll second the
I'm
motion.
not sure.
Yeah, I
What's,
think-
is the motion that you can have up to 3 rental properties?
My motion is that you can have your main house, you can have an internal JADU, you can have an external ADU that doesn't count against your mass of square footage of your house. And you can upgrade your pool house, which does include your total house square footage, to become a legal rental unit.
So in theory, you could have 4 families living on that property.
You can have your main house, a JADU, pool house, and an ADU,
And-
yes.
And 4 sets of vehicles.
Well,
I'm just
yeah, mhm,
unintended consequences here.
Yeah.
We've been down this road.
but,
right.
you know,
That's right. That's the
For all
motion.
practical purposes, that's what's happening already.
Wow.
Well, you can get that today if you split your lot, build another residence, build a ADU, then build an ADU and
Yeah,
et cetera.
But we're not talking about the lot split
No, I
here.
understand, but
So-
you still
can
can
get
have
that
4 families living on one piece of what today is got one piece of property with one house. You could.
So that's the motion. And I've got a motion and a second.
I'm second.
No, Diana seconded it. So is there any further comment? Okay, all in favor?
There was a
Aye.
comment.
Aye.
Nay.
One opposed?
Yeah, I would rather that the document says we're considering it as opposed to making a snap decision.
It would be considering.
Is that a nay or an aye?
It would be considering.
I think the motion is to consider it.
Consider it, yes. I'd like to consider it where we would evaluate it more, yes.
If the motion is to consider it,
Yes,
say that in the housing element, then I'll change my voice.
that's what they said. It's going to be.
Yeah, they're all to consider it. Future.
She said allow when she. was
But,
speaking.
but I
Well,
think
it's
the
gonna come
allowance
back.
is conditioned on getting
The,
the
that's
permit,
plan
or the
approved.
approval
The
from the
plan
HCD.
Consider everything.
All right. So then the fourth one is very similar to that one, except it takes a different approach. Someone has a main house, they have a JADU, they have an ADU. And just in your last motion, you allowed the 4 units. Now, would you allow that property owner or consider an ordinance that would allow that property owner to build a second ADU intentionally?
Yeah, I'd like to, if a lot is more than an acre and a half or 2 acres, yeah, I would think that there's room for that. But if it's a smaller lot, I wouldn't want to see it. They already, they may already have a pool house, which, we're saying that we would consider that, but building another one that's, 4 feet away from the fence and things like that, just putting a lot of issue on the neighbors.
And to Mr. Morris's comment, it affects the total build out on the lot
Yeah,
when you call it an ADU instead of a guest house.
Well, so
Hmm.
just to follow up what you're putting before us is if you have a property that has a ADU and a JADU, neither of which count against the square footage, and a main house, can they build a second ADU, the square footage of which would count against the square footage maximum?
Right.
And what we've just approved is if they had built a guest house or pool house, which has the qualifications of the ADU, it counted against the square footage, and they can rent it. And now can they build that anew?
Right.
That's the
And they
question.
could technically call it a guest house or a pool house, build it, and then under the code that you just said, you would consider rent it.
But the guest house counts the cost
Yes.
against.
But it
Against
counts
the
against
square
the square
footage.
footage.
Yeah, and so would one ADU if you allowed 2.
Right.
So would,
So
But
if you allowed one ADU to be built, and then you said, okay, you can build a second, that second ADU detached would we could say count against your floor area?
well, it doesn't say that here.
No, but you could do that as part of the
We could do a
consideration.
lot of things.
You could.
We're trying.
I think that would make sense to approve that, because that's essentially what we just approved for somebody who had already built it,
Mhm.
but it counted against their square footage. And for someone who hadn't already built it, could they build it and have it count against their square footage if they have square footage left?
Right.
I think it would only make sense to
question.
allow it.
Yes.
Can you actually do that now? So let's say I have a piece of property, I have square footage I can build on. Could I build a whole bunch of little houses right now?
No.
Or anything that
No.
says it has to be one primary?
Not
So I
now.
can't. So
Yeah.
this is changing is bigger change than it sounded the way we were just saying. It's a bigger change. So
Yeah.
this one's harder for me.
Hmm,
I don't think I'd want to codify that.
Not
Yeah.
all pool houses are attached to anything. A lot of pool houses are separately
Detached.
detached.
Yeah.
Mhm. And then if your ADU is also separately detached.
But is this actually, so I guess I'm missing something here that I don't understand. If I have X amount of square footage I can build on my property, right now, is there anything that says that I can't make a whole bunch of different little units as long as I'm within my square footage? Or does it say it has to be a primary residence? Like,
Lisa,
could
how
you
many
do it right
detached
now?
accessory structures can you build for different purposes? He said, she said, whatever those are. And
Yeah, I need to, Ralph's on the call, maybe he can help me out. So we have a maximum floor area that everything needs to fit in, and that's usually the limiting factor, but I'm not sure we say you're limited in the number. Ralph, help me.
And it all has to be within that buildable area. It
Yeah,
can't
so
be
if I build
all.
a compound of like little
you.
houses all in my little buildable area.
Not all
Yeah, how
with
many
4 foot setbacks.
detached guest houses could we approve?
That property on Salt.
Right, just to add that, there is no limit on the number of accessory buildings. It's all just limited by your floor area allowance, as well as there's a separate limit on accessory building floor area based on a ratio of 1,200 square feet per 1 acre parcel area.
Yeah.
So,
you can do
so
it.
that's usually
they're-
the limiting factor right there,
Yeah.
is
I
what
mean,
you
there are
described.
properties that have been built within the last 5 years that essentially are compounds, which, I mean, I know one on Selby Lane, where there's multiple, I don't know how many they have. I haven't counted them, but 3 or 4 or 5.
And functionally, based on the last interpretation, if they built a pool house or a cabana with all those features, they would be able to rent it out.
Well, in the last one, we said we would consider. This
Consider.
is
No, but
codifying that
the
we
one, I'm
will.
sorry, the one prior to that, where we're actually considering allowing guest houses and pool houses to be rented beyond 30 days.
That's right.
Did you say the total square footage of all accessory dwellings was limited to 1,200 square feet?
So each.
No, each.
So an accessory dwelling unit, the maximum exemption you get is 1,200 square feet. Separately, if you were to build a guest house, maybe a couple of them, the maximum square footage is 1,200 square feet per acre. So if you had 2 acres, you got 2,400 square feet. Half an acre, 600 square feet.
Right, but if you build a 1,200 square foot ADU, you can't build another.
You could build a guest house. Yes. But then that counts in the floor area, and that's in that
Right, you can
ratio.
build a guest house, but not another ADU.
today,
I think
correct?
that's the way it should be.
Mhm.
I'm concerned about covering the lot with
With the
exempted structures, whatever they might be.
exempted, increased setback, decreased setbacks. That's what you're,
This proposal isn't to add any exempted
no.
square footage. This square footage would all count
It's all
against the
within the
maximum.
It doesn't-
buildable area.
I'm just saying, didn't say that here, and we'd have to be specific, because an ADU by definition right now does not count against your square footage, your total building square footage.
So you could, consider that change so long as it is not exempted square footage. And
I think this is identical to the previous one, and logically, we have to approve it, but we have to be very clear that it counts, that there's only one ADU that's exempt from the square footage.
Right, we have to say that.
Yeah, I think that we should say that.
Then it's okay.
But I don't, so we're not codifying it, we're considering it because we're tying it to the consideration.
To the other,
Where
to
we,
the other
would-
one.
where we would then get input from the residents so that we would
Seriously.
understand what they believe the impact would be. There's already been discussion of, you can have 4 rental units on one piece of property. I think that that's going to be a little overboard and it's not going to be acceptable.
Essentially, that's happening today.
But anyway, okay.
We won't know until we get 300 emails.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Maybe
Okay.
more.
Do you want
is there a motion for that one?
So moved.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the fifth is to increase the school and facility unit production so that it's 10 units across all categories. The assumption here is based on the letter from Menlo College, noting that they could easily fill an additional 18 units on campus and possibly as many as 40. And it would be reasonable to assume that they might either build that housing separately, assuming they received community funding support, and or convert additional student housing to faculty housing as they are currently in the process of doing.
So a question just to clarify. So what this is suggesting, based on the letter we got from the college, that we allocate 40 units for school housing,
School and facility.
school facilities, they're separate housing units and there's an additional 4 units for Bear Gulch.
No, 40 across 34, 36 then for schools and 4 for Bear Gulch.
Well, why wouldn't we say 40 for schools and 4 for Bear Gulch? Because the letter that we got from the president of Menlo College says 40 units. He's just dealing with the college. He's not dealing with Bear Gulch.
Right, well, that.
I
that-
think we should take his number. This is what I would propose to the council, that we take the Stevens number, which is 40 units. This is over 8 years when the development could happen. Of course, it would require funding, but it's 8 years. This is a key issue for us, is
Big deal.
housing on schools in addition to ADUs, and that we authorize and put into our plan 40 units on the schools. That's based on his letter that we're using that number. And there's an additional 4 units on Bear Gulch for institutional housing, if you want to call it that, there'd be 40 units that would be in our plan, 44 units that would be in our plan.
So currently in your plan, you have 34. 4 of those are Bear Gulch. The other 30 are Menlo School, Lisa, and Sacred Heart, or some combination thereof?
We had estimated 20 at the college and 10 at the school.
20 at the college, 10 at school, and then 4 for Bear Gulch.
That's correct.
So you're saying that to increase the college number to 40.
Well, I think we can rely on 40 on the college over 8 years, because he said in his letter that they can use 40 units.
So you're adding an additional 30 across the board, not total of 40.
Well, I'm not as convinced that the school is right, but the 20 units at the school is right, but
Was it 10 or
I'm
20?
comfortable saying we could do 40 units at the school because we have a letter from the college identifying 40 units.
I'm just trying to get to that total number
Yeah, okay.
that's in that table.
I agree with the mayor wholeheartedly. So 40 for the college. How much for Menlo School? 10?
No, we
was it
had 20 in there
20?
for Menlo School.
No, we had 10 for Menlo School,
That's what I
20
thought,
for
10.
Menlo
Yeah,
College.
10, so that's
10 and 10.
50.
And then 4 at Bear
for
Gulch.
Bear Gulch.
All right,
That's
so
fine.
you have those numbers, Lisa, in your head?
Yeah,
Yes.
40,
Okay.
10, and 4.
That's better than I
Yeah, so
thought.
40 at the college, 10
Yeah.
at Menlo School, 4 at Bear Gulch.
Yeah,
I
I think
fail to
that's
see
very
how
good.
they're going to put 40
well, that's not,
units on that
I-
campus.
he wrote it down. It's in his letter
Well,
and let's,
The place I'd say, I mean, I don't know if it's realistic. You would have a better sense than me.
well,
But that would be an apartment building that would be on El Camino in the O'Brien parking lot.
at Alejandra. It's the corner.
well,
of-
I know,
the
yeah.
O'Brien
that
park
is.
lot.
I
It's
know
just,
where
it's
that
down,
is.
it's in my backyard.
And
Okay,
it's, well, it's a little bit, it's a little bit to the east.
but
of
I'm
that,
not going to
but-
complain.
And it's across the street from Carton Field, so there are no
It'd be
real
perfect.
neighbors there. But I just think 40 is a little stretch.
I think
Really.
it'd be. a
Well, that's
beautiful- I
just in
think-
his letter.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And
my
what they've been
2
doing recently,
Mhm.
they took some dormitory units.
Yeah,
Right.
but
And
are you
converted
counting
those.
those or are we?
That would
those
be
are-
all inclusive of what he's.
We do
talking
get to
about.
count those units, yes.
Right.
Yeah, okay, so it's
Yes.
really not 40 brand new ones. We've got
in the
three
pipeline,
new
correct.
ones already essentially
Okay.
coming up.
Okay, is that a policy direction as well?
So
Yeah.
moved.
All right,
Second.
well, I'm not
Uh,
gonna stand in
Se-
the way of that.
Moved,
one.
second,
Yeah, I vote for it, yes.
in favor.
All in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's-
Good.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
And lastly, from my perspective, the council may have some additional adds. There were some comments in relation to the land use cost or land cost in Atherton. Here, staff can certainly support the addition of language directly addressing the high cost of land and even additional discussion around the issue. But staff does not recommend and can't support the removal of any of the existing language related to current policy constraints. These specifically relate to constraints on development of affordable housing. Staff can concur that land use is likely the significant restraint to development of affordable housing. However, the other constraints listed density, predominant minimum lot sizes, lack of diverse zoning, or policy constraints that also contribute to a lack of development of affordable housing in town. A change in these policy constraints would certainly have an impact on the economics of any development.
I would suggest to make it more clear, because it's a big deal, that they include page 30, the graph on page 37 of the second appendix, which compares Atherton, nobody can see this out there, but compares Atherton prices to
Everybody else's, yeah.
every other
That's
every
the
other
ski- the ski
jurisdiction.
slope-
It's
ski
like a
slope
big,
graph.
yeah,
It's unbelievable.
it's like,
And it's,
Matterhorn.
it's the, as Rick has said before, it's the essence of the problem, particularly on the affordable housing. You
Right.
can't build affordable housing on $8 million property
12
unless all the, you folks want to chip in or something, it just can't be done.
To
And-
replicate that graph earlier in the housing element so that we can discuss it. as
Right
part
in
of
the
what-
area where they're talking about local barriers, because it's the number one barrier.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
but I think that we need to continue, if we remove the other ones, it will become a lightning rod. And I think that the other ones also have relevance, and I wouldn't want to see them all removed and just say, it's just too expensive here because nothing, they'll come up with something for us to do to improve that situation. Such as use our tax dollars to either build a fund, which I know we're talking about, or to buy property or expand property that we already have, or something else that might be more detrimental to the community. So I would rather see us, I think front and center is the cost. I don't disagree with that. We talked about it at the last meeting, and it's a very valid point. But the other ones also, I think, should continue to be listed, because I do think that they show that we've considered everything. And, so that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Your comments?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Did we verify the jobs numbers and
Wait,
increase
that's a
them?
different subject.
Oh.
Let's finish this
Oh.
issue first.
Okay.
Just
The-
to make,
the-
we're on
The heart of
this,
this issue,
page 22, right?
the heart of
Yeah.
this issue is on page 22, where there's a table that's in blue. There's actually two tables on that page. And one suggestion, which I think is agreed to, is to pull up the graph from the appendix, page 37, which really shows in spades the cost of property in Atherton compared to elsewhere in the county. And the other is whether, and staff has agreed to make the overriding issue be the cost of land, but there are three other bullet points that are identified in this table. The lack of zoning for a variety of housing types beyond single-family detached homes, lack of land zone for multifamily development, and minimum lot sizes.
Yeah.
So, is there any public comment? Yes.
Rick, I'm confused a little bit by what you're going towards. If I'm reading this correctly, the recommendation of staff would suggest that you're opening up a can of worms for yourself in terms of going back to the state and stipulating the fact that because of our policies internally, we're incapable of making those changes necessary to have multifamily. So isn't it incumbent by definition that you as a committee have to change the policies in that regard? And I don't think that's really what you're trying to stipulate at this time. You may ultimately have to come back to them and agree that those changes are necessary. But in the interim, what you're trying to basically say is the high cost of land limits our ability to go forth with any changes. Let's let the state come back and suggest to us that you have to change all of those policy issues that the staff is recommending here and reduce the size of the lots and continue it. I just don't think that we want to open that can right now to suggest that we're incapable of making the changes as a committee here or as a council in order to accommodate what the state says.
Great, thanks. Is there any other public comment? I don't see any. Yes, go ahead.
Sure. But it's not related. It's not related.
Well, Andrea, is it on this subject?
It's related to page
No.
Okay, well, let's come to that next then. Any other? So. Comments?
Do I understand that we all agree that the cost of the land is the big issue? So it's really how
It's the
much do we
biggest issue.
highlight the other ones? And how much are we remiss by not prominently putting them in there? So are we discussing whether we take them out or we make them less prominent? What are we actually discussing right here?
Both. I'd say both.
Cost should be number one.
I think we all agree that the cost is number one, and that's our big lead. The question is, do we list the other ones or not list the other ones? As the
I think
gentleman
they
said,
should be
we're
listed.
setting our, we're pointing out to it. Do we have to do it, or do we put it and put that in the, maybe that should be in the back pages, like you said, and pull the other stuff to the front.
Yeah.
So it's still there, so we're not in trouble for not saying it. I'm just trying to understand, do we have to say it, or, do we
Well, I
have to?
think the question is for staff, that they're saying they can't support that revision of removing those. Explain to us why.
Could it be moved to the back? And we pull the other stuff to the front?
I think it's, and Lisa, help me out here. I think it's very evident that this community has larger lot sizes than most other communities. It's also very evident we have a high value of land and that we only have predominantly single-family zoning. That makes us unique. And the state is really focused on the best way to attain affordable housing is through multifamily zoning. And that's their laser focus in this housing element opportunity. And so we're going to get that feedback regardless, as Mr. Shepherd indicated, let the state say that. But staff feels that including that in here is pointing it out is certainly clear. But I have I mentioned to the mayor when this came up, I have a concern that if our excuse is just the high value of land, that we automatically become a target, not just by the state, but by a lot of housing advocate groups out there that can really call attention to members of our community.
I agree with what Bruce said. I think the other thing you got to understand
Bruce,
too
sorry.
is that the housing element, this is just our first draft, and our general plan prohibits multifamily housing, right? So you can say that the Atherton general plan prohibits multifamily housing, but we don't need to offer it up.
No, I just,
Elizabeth? do you want to
I just,
speak?
Jeff, in all due respect, I don't think that state HCD really cares about our general plan. They are wanting us to modify our general plan in order to comply with what they are wanting to see in lots of ways. So I don't think, I mean, in lots of ways, clearly our general plan is the way it is, and we prohibit multifamily dwellings and development. So, but I'm really concerned that if we don't kind of do a broader brush of rationale and just hang our hats on the fact that we have large and landed estates and lots that are single-family dwellings, and it's just unaffordable to do anything with, we will become a big target. And I don't want that. I think that we can put all these other rationale in between it and fill it out. And it's not, it doesn't hurt us one way or another. I think it does. So that's my personal opinion. I can't call on you. The mayor has to.
Just a second, let me take comments from the council. Go ahead.
Yeah, if alls we do is say, oh, it's too expensive to buy property here. The state's position has always been, well, it would be cheaper if you allowed 10 units, or in one case, one of the organizations came back and said 100 units per acre. That would make it cheaper per, the cost of the land kind of negligible. And so I think we should list the other things, not front and center, but they should be listed there that we've considered, we've thought about those and we recognize those and see what they have to say. But, you know, that's their position, and that's what their position has been all along. You guys in Atherton, you don't allow housing less than 1 acre, you know, and that's one of the reasons why your property is so expensive. If you would expand your property or your general plan, we can do that. And in fact, we actually do multifamily housing now with SB 9 and
Well.
with ADUs. So there are multifamily properties in Atherton, or will soon be, but there are some already with ADUs, and there's multiple families living there. So.
Okay. So this table identifies 2 columns. One column is local policies in place to encourage housing development. And the only item currently in there is density bonus for affordable housing per state density bonus law. And I think that there are other things, frankly, that are more important than that we are doing to encourage housing development. And those should be stated. We're establishing a robust ADU rental program. We're establishing a robust ADU incentivization program for people to build ADUs. That's part of what we're proposing here. There's policies that we're supporting that will encourage housing development at the schools. And I think those all need to be stated. I think what's stated here is in the context of the lens that the housing department looks at it. And I don't think we should use their lens for our purposes. So I think it's really important that we fill out other items that we are putting in place and considering to encourage increased housing development. With respect to the local barriers, right now there's 3 things stated, and we've all talked about the cost of land not being there and needing to be the primary one. The items that are there are lack of land zone for multifamily development. I think that totally feeds into them. And I think what we've just talked about, okay, we've just talked about allowing 4 rental properties, or if you don't count the main house, 3 rental properties in addition to the main house on a property. That's zoning the land for multifamily development. Now, maybe it's not apartment buildings. And if you want to say failure to support apartment buildings, that's a different issue. But we are zoning for multifamily development. So I think that bullet point should not be there. There are 2 other bullet points. One is minimum lot sizes. It's true, we have minimum lot sizes. We have 2 residential lot sizes. One is a minimum of 1/3 of an acre and the other is a minimum of an acre. I'm not convinced that those are a barrier to affordable housing. I think the cost of the land that underlies those lots is a barrier to affordable housing. I do think that you could build affordable housing on a property if the owner wished to put, a set of townhouses on it. Maybe they could, and they didn't have to buy the land, and maybe they could develop those and make them available at an affordable rate. As long as you don't have to buy the land, I think you can offer property or rental units that are affordable. And that's part of the heart of what we're focusing on in terms of ADUs. And it's also part of the heart of what we're focusing on for the school property. I mean, maybe that's what the first bullet point addresses: lack of zoning for a variety of housing types beyond single-family detached homes. So if somebody had a property that was, let's say, 1.5 acres, and they wanted to put a, townhouse complex on that. That's not currently authorized by our code. And if they retained the property and rented it, then maybe that some of those units could be affordable. Depends on what their cost would be in developing it. So I can see the validity for that bullet point. And frankly, we've had one homeowner who's proposed that at 23 Oakwood. So I think that's a barrier. I would agree with that. But I don't see the lack of land zoned for multifamily, because I think we have land that we're zoning for multifamily right now.
Well, not technically. The
No.
SB 9 only applies to single family zoning, doesn't apply to multifamily zoning,
No, but it's
And you still
multifamily
retain-
if you can rent 4 units on your property.
but it's not zoned for that. You allow it as a use, but you're not technically zoning the property for duplexes or fourplexes.
But so if we zone to allow 4 units on the property, you think that would be different than what we're doing?
Yes,
I don't understand that. I don't understand how that would be different.
well, because you're allowing a fourplex. Someone could.
No,
come in
you're,
next-
well, you're allowing it in whatever configuration you're going to allow. The way we've got it is you would allow a JDU, an ADU, a pool house, and a primary house.
Yeah, but you're not zoning for that. You're just allowing that as a use. The state makes that distinction. Mona, could you help out there?
Right, so the difference between zoning for single-family residential as opposed to multifamily, the multifamily, we know that the property owner has to build according with that density requirement, as distinguished with a single family that has the option, the election to move forward with an SB 9 split. They may never do so. It may always remain as big as the lot currently is, or they might decide to do the lot split and then build maybe 1 additional unit, or maybe do 2 on each. So on the one hand, the single family residential is just an option. On the other hand, the multifamily zoning, we know with certainty what is going to be constructed there. Plus, with the multifamily, they don't have the benefit of further doing a lot split, either through an SB 9 or any other mechanism.
I don't see the distinction. I dropped that bullet point myself.
Well, I see the distinction, but I am concerned that staff's not moving on this. Normally, you persuaded them to do whatever you want by now.
Must have some good reasons for it.
Well, it's clear that we need to put in the affordability right up front.
We all agree on that. And I agree with Rick's point that we can add things to the left. That chart can be improved dramatically.
Yep.
The issue that people are concerned about is any entree to multifamily. And I think the point that you're concerned about is trying to hide it is just like asking for a punch in the face.
Well, why don't we put more on how we're encouraging it?
Well,
Well, that seems like all we're doing.
That's all.
is there a difference between the first and second bullet points on the right?
I don't-
Lack of zoning for a variety of housing types beyond single-family detached homes and lack of land zone for multifamily development? Those are pretty much the same thing.
I kind of read them as the same.
Yeah, I would agree.
So I would take out the second one, because I think the second one opens up this whole issue on multifamily that
Continuing.
we're probably going to have more discussion on. We know this is going to go through several iterations, but why lead with that in our first one?
Yeah, I think you can safely remove the second one.
I'd agree with that. Remove that second bullet point.
Okay. I think we could also beef up the responses in the second table, which is local policies that are not in place but have further council interest for further exploration.
Yep.
We've gone through a whole number of issues.
Yeah, we can beef up the left side of both tables.
So
Good.
moved.
Do we need a motion on this, or is that?
No, I think that one was just direction
Okay.
with respect to that particular issue.
Now, let's,
Unmoved.
yeah, I've got some public comment. Go ahead, Bruce. And then Andy.
I'm agreeing with all of what you've just said. So, I mean, as I look about Elizabeth's comment about what we want to not avoid, I think Bill's initial comment about that you can't squeeze all of this in the same box. We're a little bit different. We want to recognize that the same way. And Rick, your suggestions at the end. Part of this is a problem between form and substance in my book. Are we trying to squeeze into a form that the state's going to accept and look at a box and check it? Are we trying to give the substance that we actually agree that we need to help with all the housing issues that are out there, and we're trying to do the best way we can by recognizing it? That's a communications document as well. And I'm suggesting we've talked about multifamily in a different way, and that is putting in ADUs and other type of residents. How do we get our story in this document to go back to say that we had, in the community, recognize our obligation to meet this requirement? And we are doing it in a way we think is a thoughtful way to achieve that goal, mindful of the community in which we live in. And I'm not sure how you get that across in this document, but if the form is the only thing you have to do, then we'll still have to work with the colorful language or try to work with the language we got to get forward our positions, which you have articulated so well, and yet recognize George's concerns at the same time of what the state's looking for. I am frustrated a little bit by the thought that we're introducing multifamily into this document without understanding the fact that we are trying to do our best job at creating what Rick says, multifamily in a different way. And we are trying to do so. So George, I'm supportive of the challenges you're going with, but perhaps there's a way that staff and others can come up with language that can accommodate both of these and still get across the point we're doing, while still accommodating what you're thinking are necessary in order to have a defensible position in the future. Thank you.
Nice put.
Yeah,
Kind of
let me just
preamble.
add, the concept of the story is really important because there is a whole, this is going to be looked at carefully. We know that. They're looking at everybody's carefully, but we're going to get focus. And I think that the council has clearly expressed its intent to comply with the requirements. From the very beginning, we've acknowledged that. We're not fighting the requirements. We're trying to figure out how to make the requirements work in this community. And that really means, how do we provide affordable housing out of this community where land costs $8 million an acre? And we can't do it if somebody's going to have to buy land, but there are ways to do it where people don't have to buy land. And I think we want to communicate that to them because that's the heart of our story. And I think that's probably not been communicated to them by other communities. Whether they accept it or not is probably a different issue, but I think how we tell that story is really important. Oh,
One other maybe hard to believe, but one of the reasons why Atherton has a hard time with affordable housing is if I've talked to a nonprofit developer that builds affordable housing in Silicon Valley, and he said to get the financing for affordable housing is a whole different thing than building for market rent apartments. And so you have to get grants from the state, from the federal government, from counties, loans from counties, loans from cities. And there's a scoring mechanism. And so I said, and he was on the board at Menlo School. I said, well, could you build at Menlo College? He said, well, I'll come down and look at it with you. But the problem, the scoring mechanism, because we don't have commercial in town, we don't have transportation system in town. He goes, those all work against you in the scoring, and then you're going to be not competitive to get the public grants. So even though it sounds weird, financing is a big problem for affordable housing on top of the land costs.
That's a good point.
okay.
Although we can use Menlo Park.
And yeah.
I had something I wanted to ask about the school housing, kind of following up what he went before, but I didn't get a chance to ask it when we were on that topic. Would it be okay to ask now? One of the questions I have is when you look through this document, there's no mention of the public schools that we have. And I know that we don't control that land, but if someone on the Selby Lane School, for example, were to build some complex there, it would count toward our numbers.
I suggested
Absolutely.
that to George, that we put that in, that we include the public schools in there and put a number or two, because I know.
Why did
Anson-
we not do that? Is because I know that I was asking that too, and I was trying to understand why we don't, if we have a number for schools, but we're only focused on private and the public ones, when you look at some of the grants, some of those, like the Selby Lane School, for example, might qualify for some other things, but I don't know if they have any interest, but maybe it's something we could say we're going to explore.
Well, we already, one of the comments in the table was to include information about public schools, that spreadsheet table that we handed out.
Yeah.
Lisa, was there any communication with any of the school districts about a number of need for housing or their anticipated production?
No, we weren't able to receive that. We can follow up again. And then we can add a discussion, like you said, about public schools in there.
I think we should add it and just
People in
say,
the back have been waiting.
No, I
There's-
know.
a narrative that we're also, looking to work with the public school systems, because there's a number of schools here. And some of them have a lot of land and some of them don't. I agree.
Yep. And they have open space requirements that they've got to mandate as well. So.
Yeah.
Okay, Andy, go ahead. And just to recognize, we've got a limited amount of time here.
Yeah, this will be quick. The gentleman very articulately covered most of my points. The one that wasn't covered is why does it matter if we're targeted by the state to end up with them looking at multifamily, or we tell them that's the answer? Is targeting going to be worse for us?
I don't think it's targeting by the state that we're worried about.
What are we worried about?
Well, at the Menlo Circus Club Horse Show, there's going to be a demonstration. It's just one incident of a public demonstration by a housing advocacy group that's probably going to provide a challenge for them during the
Be very
day.
disruptive.
And those,
Isn't this going to happen regardless of what we put in that document, whether we say,
Not necessarily.
not necessarily. There are many, many other groups out there that we're aware of that do the same thing. And it's not just the public perception of Atherton. We do have a number of fluent members of the community that don't like that sort of attention, and it will come
Yeah.
if we become that target.
Well,
seems like it's going to come anyway?
I think there's also a concern that staff has that underlies this, that they want to make sure that we don't go too far in one direction so that the housing department rejects us out of hand versus engages with us more deeply.
Right.
That's true as well.
And that I think that's a worry that I've heard from staff.
Exactly.
Andrea, do you have a comment?
If we're ready, I know we only have a few minutes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, so Andrea Luskin, 68 Douglas Way. Firstly, thank you so much for the deep dive I've seen you guys doing over the past couple of weeks. Really appreciate that. Appreciate you all looking deeply now at the unintended consequences from some of the actions you're taking. So I just wanted to ask on page 5 of the council comment document, the second section down, I didn't see a staff response or resolution to the council comment request. Page 79, the last paragraph of A should be deleted, and I just wanted to find out where that stood. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so you are highlighting the paragraph that reads, to facilitate development of affordable housing on single-family zone properties adjacent to school sites upon acquisition of property by a school, the town will consider rezoning the property to PFS to accommodate affordable housing consistent with existing PFS zoning opportunities. Right, there's been a fair amount of discussion about that paragraph.
The recommendation was to remove it from the Menlo College section because it's been very clear from them that they are not interested.
And it's
However,
currently under the Menlo College section.
Correct, and we'll remove it from that section, but it's also under the Menlo School section, I believe, as well. And that's the part of that paragraph as well. And Menlo School is the one, Lisa, that you said expressed some interest.
That's correct. And all we're doing is just stating what existing regulations are in place.
It's existing.
And,
The
and,
question is
and
why-
trying to, I'm sorry.
No, well, it's just, I don't know if you saw the email I sent in a few days ago, or I'm sorry, a few hours ago, but the question is why, given we all know how expensive land is here and how unlikely it is for them to purchase this land and build, why would they do that when there's already property on campus? It just seems inconsistent with the message that's already being presented in the document. It seems illogical, doesn't really make sense. I don't know why we would include it. And it just puts the adjacent neighborhoods at risk and raises the concern level of those living nearby. So it's so unrealistic. Why would that be included?
Would you like, through the mayor, would you
Okay.
like me to respond, or I'm sorry? you gonna
Yeah,
respond?
please go ahead, Lisa.
Sure. So when I spoke with the school is actually interested in acquiring some nearby properties, not possibly adjacent, but they have acquired property in another community and built multifamily housing. They did indicate that their teachers and their faculty are not interested in living on campus. So it seems the most logical opportunity would be an opportunity to expand their campus to have that. We've relied on multifamily housing at the schools in the last 2 housing element cycles, and none have been built. And so in order to really support this, my professional opinion is that we need something in here that shows HCD, things are going to change, that we will now realize the development in the next 8 years. It's not a status quo situation. And that's why staff had recommended a few other changes that I know have been stricken from the document. So that's kind of goes to the heart of it. And it's existing code. If they were to buy a house next door, then the town would consider rezoning it, because that would be an application that we would be required to consider.
But it then
So up
becomes
to the
part
council how
of-
you want to address that.
It then becomes part of the campus if they purchase it. You already said that staff and faculty say they don't want to live on campus. If they buy adjacent property and say it's part of campus and build multifamily, then it's part of campus. So it doesn't make any sense. Then they'd be living on campus.
Yeah, so this paragraph just states what the current rule is. And we have relied on this concept in both of the last 2 housing cycles. And I think that what Lisa said is we're not going to get anywhere with this, with HCD in this housing cycle unless we can show there's some different intent from the schools, which is part of the purpose of the letter that we got from Menlo College. And subsequent to receipt of that letter, there's been a fair amount of discussion within the community of possibly supporting Menlo College towards that fundraising goal that they recognize they don't have the funds right now to do this. And there's been discussion with Menlo College about revising that letter. So that letter may come back in a revised form that we can rely on more deeply in the future. Maybe we'll get a letter from Menlo School to the same end. I know I had a conversation with Ann Healy, who didn't indicate that this is an area that they were focused on. Did not, yeah.
Any change like that would require public meetings. They would have to go to the planning commission. They would have to come to the council, and there would be public outreach all throughout the whole process. And both organizations listen very carefully to the concerns of the affected neighbors. That's why we reach out to all of the neighbors within 500 feet. So just because somebody has a right to do it doesn't mean that it will be, it's ministerially approved, which is what I think originally was in there, and concerns from you and your neighbors caused us to rethink that and direct staff to take the ministerially portion out.
Okay. With that, sir, we do need a basic direction that with the modifications articulated today, that staff submit this document to the state.
Wait, say that again?
With them, we need a direction to staff to submit this with the modifications made by the council this evening.
And you're wanting it done because you're going to submit to the state by what date?
As soon as
Tomorrow.
Lisa gets all of the comments into the document,
By the end
So-
of the month?
hopefully by the end of by Friday.
Will we get to see a turnaround of this?
We can certainly send one out at the time we publish it, but we can't send it out for comments back from the council for a consensus document to send out without another public engagement meeting.
Okay, if you could just send it out to us so we can do a quick review
Our
if there's any
Yeah,
non-public type comments.
With track
And-
changes.
yeah. It would be nice with track changes like you did before.
Uh,
you know.
You cannot provide feedback back to staff to make changes to the document outside of a public meeting.
We got to hope we got it right,
Yeah.
or we got to delay the whole process.
Correct.
I have a feeling we're going to.
We can send you, I'm happy to send you a version of the document upon its completion. But what won't be able to happen is you'd comment back.
So do you need a motion?
Yes, I do.
I make a motion that we, with the changes that we've articulated today, sometimes rather clumsily, that we submit, we give staff the approval to submit the first iteration of our housing element.
I'd like to second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Motion to adjourn is in order.
So
So
moved.
moved.
I don't know, the planning commission doesn't need any time to prepare. We've given them too much, I think.
They've got, well,